Welcome to Philosophy Hall, a place where we discuss all things academic.
Welcome, everybody. Now, we should start today's show to say that these are our own opinions, that they don't represent the opinions of our employers. I think it's important. We wanted to start the show to demystify various academic processes that often seem to students and maybe to faculty opaque. And it's not always clear how the university works. It's an old, complicated organization. The institutions have a history. So please send us your questions. But today, we are going to specifically discuss admissions to graduate school. And I think both of us receive questions on graduate school, especially. It is the season where it's time to start thinking about graduate school. And so let's try to open up that Pandora box today, right?
Yes, that sounds perfect. And just one little preface, we will be speaking mostly about graduate school applications for the humanities rather than the sciences, although we might touch on some things that are useful to disciplines beyond the humanities as well, more general questions.
That's such an important point. To reiterate, the way admissions work for graduate school to the humanities, to the social sciences, and to the sciences, it's not always the same. It depends on the institution, it depends on the department, and it depends on your geography. So, for example, the way graduate school works in the UK is slightly different from the way it works in the US and Canada.
The US and Canada are different in the kinds of funding packages to the extent to which you're self funding or being funded by the university. So we will get into some of those things today. When we're talking about graduate school applications, we're talking about master's and PhD level program admissions. Dennis, do you want to just say a few things about what are the differences you perceive in those application processes between master's and PhD level?
Yeah, okay. The PhD program is more competitive. I think that's a major difference, and that's something worth thinking about. Um, PhD programs in the United States in the humanities and social sciences are usually fully funded. And really, my advice, this is, I repeat this often to my students, is not to go to graduate school for a doctorate unless you can get a fully funded package. If you're not getting a fully funded package, it's an early sign that the institution is not willing to invest in your career. Your task initially is to get funded and get to a place where you're happy, healthy, productive. You'll probably hear me say this a lot. You need to be happy, healthy, and productive. That means you have to be happy with the weather. You have to be happy with the university where you are. There needs to be enough opportunities within the university so you don't feel isolated. And it's great if you can be somewhere with a support system where you have friends, you have family, you have kind of colleagues. So it has to be all those go into a consideration of when you're choosing the graduate school.
Let's talk about what needs to be done during a graduate school application round. Usually, the school will ask for a series of documents like a statement of purpose or research statement.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, a personal statement where you talk more about yourself very briefly, and ask for a writing sample of
Yeah.
15 to 20 pages. They might ask for a curriculum vitae. And then for evidence of excellence in your undergraduate or previous graduate study, if you're coming from a master's program. So that might be transcripts and letters of recommendation from your professors. And I think we should do a separate show of letters of recommendation.
The short version of it is that the letters of recommendation are the ones that you are not writing. It's the only document where you're dependent on somebody else, which means you want to get that process started early. You can't wait until the deadline. Your package needs to be ready early, at least in draft form, so you can send it over to the people who are recommending you and who can read over what you're submitting and reinforce some of the major points. So that's why it seems like sometimes the deadlines are like sometimes midwinter or late fall, but you really want to get that process started early summer. You want to have your documents already in some shape early summer, so then you can ask for recommendation letters and be organized about that. But as you said, that's a whole other can of worms that we're
Yes.
going to deal with later.
Yeah.
For now, it's quite a bit of material. Statement of purpose, sometimes called research statement, personal statement, writing samples, your CV, your transcripts. You got to stay organized. I read hundreds of admission every year. This is the way I treat the documents. It may be other faculty, they prioritize different kind of documents. But for me, from these documents, the most important one is the research statement or the how does Columbia put it?
Columbia calls it a statement of purpose,
Statement of purpose.
but it is a research statement. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the one that speaks most immediately to your research. That's the document I look at first. And then I might take a look at your CV. I will dip into your recommendations. I will dip into your writing sample. But for me, I'm trying to just understand what research you're trying to do. Are you prepared to do this kind of research? And is this a good place for you? Can we support the kind of work that you want to do? And the statement of purpose is the place to begin for me.
Yes. So what kinds of things do you like to look out for in a statement of purpose? Do you like to see specific faculty named? Do you like the project to be in a fairly advanced stage already?
Okay, to answer that question, I want you to imagine, I think it's important for students to understand physically how this document travels through the department. And I think it will help you articulate a strategy of the way you write this. In the humanities and social sciences departments, social sciences it's a little tricky. Some social sciences work more like humanities, some social sciences work more like sciences. But in humanities inflected fields, your application is evaluated by a team, by a committee. So initially, there is the graduate admission committee, and it's composed of two, three, four faculty who are your initial sanity check kind of readers. And our job is to just find plausible candidates and to take the application and give it to two, three, sometimes four other readers in the department, depending on the subfield. So this, I think, already tells you a lot because if you apply to a program narrowly, wanting to work with one single faculty, you're already misunderstanding the process a little bit. Is that each faculty member who reads your application, and your application will be read and scored by two, three, four, sometimes five people. Each person gives it a score. And then those scores are averaged and then the highest scores go through and then we discuss. We actually have a meeting where but it doesn't so much matter. Let's say the average score is 4.5 and somebody has 4.6. Not so important. We're not like super quantitative. The important part is we try to find the people who are really a good fit and that have broad support in the department. That's the key here, broad support. And then we actually sit down and discuss. And it's a more intensive process than one would think. It's not just, you're not just being read by a robot. It's actual people sitting down and like with great interest going, wow, this is such a cool topic. Or we really hope to work with this person. And that's the feeling you want to elicit through your documents. But if you apply to a program and you think, I just want to work with Dennis, and all your documents say, Dennis, nobody else for me, just Dennis. And some, maybe in the British system, there are some systems where your faculty advisor gets like two, three people just for themselves, and they get to pick those. And in the sciences, it often works like that. You admit people to your lab, and like you get, it's almost like employment. You are like a manager of the lab, and you are getting specific people for specific roles. With us, it's different. Is with us, we are looking for broad base of support. So you don't want to be so narrow to work with a single faculty because you'll get maybe high scores with that faculty. But everybody else who's reading your application will say, I don't know how to help this person. So narrowly focused on this one faculty and this one super specific thing. How would they take courses in the department? How would they have your advising from other people? So make sure in your documentation, you're familiar with the department and you're building that broad base of support. That would be my biggest, if there was a one takeaway point from today, that's the biggest thing is imagine the people you're writing for.
Yeah, that is excellent. I'm struck by how similar this is to postdoctoral applications, and I've been involved in that process, and it's basically exactly the same as you're describing it, where there are real readers, there's real scoring, and then there's a big conversation that happens in which people are deeply engaged in who the candidates are. But the candidates are very much known to the faculty at a certain.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
one thing that you said, when the option to select your field of study. You might check a box. My areas of research are 19th century British and disability studies and eco criticism. Or,
Right.
yeah, you should actually select more than one because they will be coming to the attention of different groups within the department, and you want to build up that broad base of support.
Maybe, Arden, I was going to ask you. So, when you were getting your doctorate, on the other side of it, when you're writing your dissertation,
Yeah.
you're putting together a committee. You're putting together a committee. So, how many people are on your dissertation committee?
Oh, as a PhD student in the humanities, you'd have typically three people on your dissertation committee that you meet with regularly. One of them is the official advisor. The other two are still very closely involved with your work. And you meet with them pretty frequently to talk about your latest writing. When you reach closer to the time of completing your PhD, then you get two more additional external examiners who will be part of your PhD defense. But your committee of three people, this core group, will stay with you for the duration of your time there. So it's quite important to select that committee well.
So the reason why I'm asking is note your end game. So several years down the line, you will have a committee that supports your work. And you'll have one person who's squarely just, let's say you are interested in 19th century fiction, American fiction. So you want probably somebody who's doing 19th century fiction on your committee. And then you'll have other people. Like I work in media studies, I do computational analysis. So I often provide that aspect of someone's work. And then another member may speak to another. You want to have this three-dimensional sort of support network where different aspects of your research are being supported by different committee members. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is that this is your end game. This is what you want. Like a happy student will have a really awesome graduate committee that will help write the dissertation project or support the dissertation project. But similarly, when you apply, you're already sketching in the outlines of that committee. It's the same audience. So, yes, you will have an advisor. You can say the question we often get, like, should we mention one person by name or several people? So you can say, yes, clearly my interest in whatever 19th century British literature, eco criticism, they align well with this or that person. And I would love to work with this person. But also other aspects of my work could I'd like to learn from this person. I'd like to gain, it doesn't have to be stuff you're already expert in. You want to leave room for growth. And you'd like to say, I'd like to work with this other faculty to maybe expand into music because I know your department also does this and this could be an aspect. So you're outlining this shape.
Mhm.
Now, the shape I often draw a shape on the board. So you don't want that shape to be just like one line. That's one person. You don't want that shape to have, you don't want to be an octagon. You don't want to be like, you don't want to have, because you're not working with 12 people. You're looking for two, three, four people on four kind of, you want to triangulate, be a triangle or a square, draw, articulate an area of research that's rich enough to be supported from different sides by slightly sort of complementary subfields. And you're speaking broadly to those fields. And that also makes me think that it's good to mention a name
Mhm.
because you are familiar with the department. So you're saying, but really the name is not important. What's important is you clearly understand what people do in the department and kind of the way they describe their work. So if somebody is working in eco criticism, when I do that first pass through graduate school admissions and I see eco criticism, I go, okay, this application really, this person should read it, like Jennifer Wenzel or one of our colleagues. This person should read it. Like my job is easier when I can clearly understand where to send this application and who is going to be most excited to read this application. And I need two, three ideas, two, three, four ideas in this, right? In this shape, two, three, four people who will read it and see themselves as a potential advisor on this topic and be excited to work with the student. That's what I'm looking for. And so therefore, this is what you're trying to convey in your letter, in your research statement, or what was it? The
Research
research
purpose.
statement of purpose.
Yeah.
What is your purpose?
One question that students asked me only last week is to what extent, when you are admitted, are you held to the statement of purpose? Are you made to do that project? Can your research evolve and change? Is it a problem if it does? Dennis, what are your thoughts on that? Have you seen that happen?
So it does happen. I have to be honest. I did this in graduate school. So when I applied to graduate school, I applied with one project. I thought I would do much work on postmodern, post-Soviet fiction, and I thought I would do much more with translation, and it didn't pan out. Just naturally, as you take courses, your interests change, and that committee structure may change. So I would say it's okay. You're not really beholden. It's not like a contract. But if you're drastically like imagine you're coming in as a medievalist and the medievalists are super interested in working with you. And maybe they fought hard during this meeting. They fought hard to get you. Like sometimes, so it's another kind of interesting thing to understand. We don't really have quotas as such, but imagine there's many sub-disciplines in our department. And imagine maybe for several years, this never happens, but I'll just use it as a hypothetical example. For several years, the medievalists didn't get anybody. So then on the third year, they go, no, this time we are super excited about this person. And they may make an extra case and really fight for you. So it happens all the time where we're trying to also have a diversity of fields and make sure not everybody is applying all with same specialization, same topic, same subfield. Now imagine the disappointment of a faculty member, a group of faculty members who fought tooth and nail for you. And then you said, no, just kidding. I'm doing nothing with medieval studies. Actually, I really just wanted to do whatever, contemporary literature. Now you would still be fine. You would rebuild this base of support, but there would be maybe a little bit of friction. It happens all the time and it's normal. But if somebody sees, so don't try to game the system. If
Oh,
somebody sees that you are purposefully applied here, but really all along you wanted to do something else, that undermines the community trust. So again, we're not like a big corporation. We are a dozen or so people who are actively researching and we spend a lot of time on the application process and we're truly excited to work with you. But when you come in, of course, your interest will change. That structure of the committee will change. And sometimes you try something and it doesn't work out. Sometimes the people who you thought you would work well with, for whatever reason, don't mesh just in terms of personalities. It's totally fine. In a good, healthy department, you'll be able to switch no problem.
so just to speak personally, that happened to me too.
Oh,
I applied and got in as an 18th century drama person because I had read and created a website of 90 18th century comedies. And so I really knew a lot about 18th century drama. And I fully intended to continue working on 18th century drama in graduate school. And then I was pulled in a different direction by my interests. And I didn't switch temporally too much just to romanticism, which is one generation later. But it was enough
mm.
that it was a different dissertation committee than I would have worked with otherwise. Yeah, you can switch, but it has to be a kind of natural evolution. And I like what you said before of don't game the system, but allow your interests to develop as they come into contact with new people and new ideas.
And did you face any friction when you were switching, or it was just a
I, I,
natural sort
I
of
think,
drift?
no, yeah, I think everyone was pretty willing to allow that kind of movement, particularly because of the structure of the PhD program that we have, which is um, the first 2 years are caught up in coursework, and you're expected to do coursework across a variety of times and historical traditions, national literatures. You are, by the program, exposed to all kinds of stuff. I think that there's quite a lot of tolerance for movement, but also I was just fortunate in the personalities who were involved.
Yeah, that's my experience as well. At the end of the day, we are just trying to be supportive. We're trying. I think like students often think that this is like such a judgy evaluative process, and really our conversation is often about is this the right place for someone, and can we support this person? Once you reach a certain bar of being a good student and kind of being articulating your project and it sounds interesting, once you're past this bar, it all becomes a question of fit. Is this a place for you to do this kind of work? And how can we help you? Because it just feels bad when somebody enters the program and you don't really have their interests misaligned, have nobody to work with. That just feels bad for everyone. And so that's primarily we're trying to address this question of fit, but that also means that your letter should address the question of fit. Why is this the right place for you? How are you going to develop through coursework, through various courses you take? In the US, you're applying, sometimes we call it sequential PhD, because you're doing 2 years of coursework. In your second year, you're already transitioning to some teaching. That's very common in many universities. And then when you after that 2 years, you're getting your master's implicitly on the way. You're like, I'm just driving by a master's. And then you will, after your dissertation and after your exams, you get your PhD. But in some places, like I think from what I understand, the British system works like that, is that you finish your master's separately
Mhm.
and then you apply just for the PhD component. And so you don't have time to, for 2 years, develop and change, meet new faculty, change your grow. You're already applying with a much more focused, specific project. And there in the British system, it's more normal to say, I'm specific. I already know my committee exactly because you don't have all that the lead in time. But here we want you to change. We want you to grow in those 2 years when you're taking your courses. We want you to meet new faculty. We want you to gain new interests from when you were an undergraduate. It would be strange if you didn't.
Yes. So, what are some of the mistakes that you see when you're reading statements of purpose?
Wow. My biggest pet peeve, and I think we see this in every field. I think this happens just in every field, every discipline, and I hear this from colleagues everywhere, is that often people mistake the research statement or statement of purpose with, they make it personal. They make it about themselves and they make it about their love for the field. So they'll say, I love math so much when I was 3 years old. And therefore, now I'm applying to PhD. Or I love literature so much. And that's nice. It's nice to hear. But remember that you're joining us in a professional capacity. And really, I always recommend thinking about graduate school as a job. You're applying, it's a entry level apprenticeship into a career. And so you're applying for a job, just like you're not going to apply for a job and be like, when I was 3, I really loved whatever it is, being a banker or whatever it is. I don't know. But point is, don't make it about yourself. We don't really care all that much about the personal biographical stuff. And also, these days, all these things can go into the personal statement. What we care is about your intellectual journey, and we care about your ability to ask interesting research questions. So, for me, a good research statement begins with something, a scholarly question that bothers you, some mystery. You're like, I've always. So, let me give you an example. Right now, I'm working on this topic of plagiarism. To what
Uh,
extent, or plagiarism influence text reuse? To what extent do writers reuse each other's work? And
mhm.
it turns out there's like actually not that much written in this. To me, it's a fascinating topic. So if I was applying to graduate school now, thankfully I don't have to do that, I would say, here is this really cool question about to what extent do authors actually, pulp fiction writers, to what extent did they wholesale borrow plots or wholesale borrow sentences? Like what can be said about plagiarism and generally literary influence? And that would be a gateway into a good statement. Then you can say, okay, to address this question, I'd like to work with this person, and this person works on influence, and this person works on style, and maybe I will work on 19th century to answer this question. So therefore, I would work with this faculty. But note the entryway into introducing yourself. You're introducing yourself through this kind of a professional, intellectual interest, not through the details of your private biography.
So, I guess the question is then what is the function of the personal statement? The one that's a little bit
Uh,
more personal and biographical.
Good question. Honestly, so I don't know. I don't know. Like why I'd have to look when it was added, and there might have been a discussion when it was added, but I wasn't a part of that discussion. And often, by the way, often we inherit the structures. The way admissions work, when I join a department, they tell me this is how we do admissions. And often when you ask people, why do you do this? They're like, we don't know. It was like that when I joined as well. Now we do continually try to reevaluate our standards and our customs, and we try to streamline the process. So I don't have a good answer. I suspect, though, it's specifically to separate the research from the personal. I have to tell you, when I applied to graduate school, I did make this mistake as well. So I said my statement was a lot about this post-Soviet experience and kind of my own personal way through the post-Soviet experience in a way that made the research questions more personal. It could be effective to say that like my intellectual interest grew out naturally from like some event, or let's say your interest in disability studies stem from your experience with disability. That's great. That's important to know. But maybe the personal statement is there to separate those issues. And maybe it's also a place to talk about other stuff. For example, maybe the pathway you took into academia was not straightforward. After graduate school, you worked a little bit, you took some time off, or you applied to physics and you decided physics is not for you. And now you're going to do literary analysis. Put that part into the statement. It's there to explain your personal trajectory, but still make the research statement a statement of purpose about the research and about the intellectual. And if there's an option, if there are two separate documents, put the other things in the more biographical part of the application.
Yeah, that sounds like extremely sound advice. What about the writing sample? Now, people say in 15 to 20 pages, this is a really hefty piece of writing for someone coming out of an undergraduate program. Do I take my senior thesis and trim it down?
Right.
Oh, it's September and I haven't even written my senior thesis yet. Do I put together some papers that I wrote? Am I applying already in a master's program? I have something about to be published. Should I do that? So, how would you think about the writing sample? And again, what is the writing sample really intended to convey?
It's a good one. But let me tell you first this is that so for me, I the first thing I look at is your statement of purpose or research statement. Probably the second thing I look at is your CV. That's just a way to just get. I'm like, okay, what's your name? Where are you coming from? That's just like a map. But then the second big document I look at is your writing sample. So I tend to really prioritize the writing sample. I'm also looking to what extent you're able to write academically. And I think here we have really a great variety of great diversity of applicants, international applicants, where standards are different, not necessarily better or worse, but just different styles of academic writing. And then we have people coming from very different institutions, coming from a small liberal arts college or a large state university. To me, the writing, you can't really hide in your writing. You can put all the adjectives you want in your statement of purpose. You're great, you're amazing. I got it. But
Mhm.
the writing sample kind of quickly will show me like how much work needs to be done to get you to the level where you can publish. And you don't need to be already a published author. It's good. We want to see room, we want to leave room for improvement. But if like it's impossible, when that gap is too large and it's evident in the writing sample, then the conversation often will be about the writing sample when we meet. And we'll say, oh, that the writing needs a lot of work. Or it may be that the approach you're taking is really not the one that this department really does well. Maybe like you're like whatever it may be like a theoretical stylistic thing where we don't really, it's not our sort of how we teach writing here. And therefore, maybe they would be better off in this kind of program. So I would say, yes, spend time.
Maybe for college students who have not done a piece of writing that is that long before, um, do you have any advice for people in that situation?
Yeah, it's tough. Look, it has to be polished. So the length, it's weirdly like too long is more of a problem than too short.
Mm.
You want to have a focused, polished piece that represents the best that you have to offer. And this is we're reading hundreds of these applications, and we won't be able to read 100-page thesis or something. So stay within the page limits and try to choose portions of your existing work that are punchy, that are representative, and probably edit them. I
Mhm.
think giving another pass through these materials and also edit them with your colleagues, with your cohort. Ask other students who are maybe in your department as an undergraduate. Maybe try to find other students who are applying to graduate school and edit each other's work to make sure that often Undergraduate papers are written for like the audience of one. You can't just write for your professor. You really should be envisioning a larger audience. And the earlier you can get more people, and it's scary receiving feedback, getting your work out there, even if you're not publishing it, but just having your academic friends read it, your peers read it and go, wait a second, like this sounds like just a bunch of hot air, or this, I don't understand. You are introducing this topic or this language, but you haven't really explained it. That is super valuable.
Yeah, so I actually received this exact question. Can I re-edit my piece of undergraduate writing that I would like to submit for graduate school applications in light of all of the different experience I've had since then?
Right.
And I was like, of course you should do that.
Yes.
Make it
Yeah.
better. Why not?
Yeah.
Like your professor may even have given you feedback when you first submitted it. So why not take that and improve it? So editing is good. Circulating your materials to have other people read them and vet them is good. I think from the point of view of faculty members writing letters for you, having been in that situation quite often, it's helpful if you can send your materials, at least in progress, but as complete as possible early,
Right.
so that the faculty member can give you some feedback if it looks good or not. And then also so that they can refer explicitly to things that you mention in your statement of purpose or in your writing sample as why you would be an exemplary member of a graduate cohort at the specific university. Yeah. Dennis, are
Yeah.
there any other, like, common pitfalls that you encounter when you're reading grad school applications?
Those were two of the major ones. So the first one was being too narrow. Really, this is the biggest one. I constantly get emails from students who are saying, I'd like to work with you with reading my application or whatever. Can I apply to work with you? And then I basically say what we talked about today, which is I'd love to read your application, but make sure it appeals to a broader to a broader audience and make sure you build this broader base of support. And the second one is just the kind of research statements that are too personal and they're not about research and they're more about your own sort of growth as an individual and as a scholar, but really it should be about research questions. So those are the major ones. I think everything else is just the side effect of those two main ways to improve your application.
That's great. So I just had a couple of questions that came up from students,
Yes.
when I've spoken to them recently about this. One, in fact, is something you alluded to just now, and I get this all the time as well, which may be surprising, but I get it all the time. People write to me and say, "Will you be my advisor? I'm applying from somewhere," and which they cold call me basically. "Will you be my
Ah,
PhD advisor?" Stepping back, do you think it is wise to reach out to departments that you might be interested in working in ahead of time? Or do you think that is,
um,
in fact, counterproductive?
it's somewhat counterproductive because imagine if 100 people contacted our department, even though it would be distributed among several people, it would still be untenable, really, especially if you're contacting with these kind of general questions. Those kind of questions are better suited for your advisor who is advising you now. I guess that's another, let's say that's another piece of advice is when you're applying to graduate school from your home institution, uh, build out like you also need a support network there who will be able to advise you through the process and they should be experienced enough to answer questions, many questions like what is the difference between personal statement, how do I write a research statement, can you please read it and give comments. So contacting me with questions like that will be a little, I'll be like, why aren't you not asking this from the people who are writing your recommendation letter,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
Now it may be useful. So I think the questions that specify points of procedure or the kind of conversation we're having now, how does it work? Will it be read? I think you feel free to ask those kind of questions from our support staff. We have a really talented support staff. Every department does. And part of their job is to answer questions like procedural questions about the application. But yeah, make sure you understand the process and before you contact anybody. But I would say, yeah, contacting is a little dicey.
Yeah, I don't know if it yields the results you hope it will. I think
Yeah.
I will leave that there maybe.
But
Yeah.
Arden, before you go, so why do you think people do that?
I think often it's from a point of great sincerity. Right?
Hmm.
People are so sincere. Often people are applying from elsewhere in the world. other countries and that may work quite differently at their home institution. Say that they come from an academic culture where it would be expected that you would have an advisor lined up as you start your PhD, which is not the case here. And so I think it comes from a point of sincerity where people are saying, will you be my advisor? I would love to work with you. This is my project. What do you think?
Yeah.
And I think the main thing is just that it doesn't quite work that way here, where you would be expected to be able to adjust and make changes
Right.
if you start your program. Yeah.
And now that you say it, I feel better. Look, I do often field phone calls and Zoom calls from students. If you're sincere, go for it. I think sincerity, I will always make room for intellectual sincerity.
Yeah.
I think where we get into trouble is that if you're doing it to get ahead, if you're doing it, you're like, I'm going to contact a bunch of people so they can notice my application. It will give me a leg up. That comes through right away. And that's the wrong reason to contact someone. And you're doing the opposite. I'm likely going, oh, wow, this person is like trying to game the admissions process rather than having these sincere questions about research. So I think if you're sincere, you'll probably get much more leeway. Also, look, some fields, let's say you have an unusual field, like you happen to speak ancient Greek and Sanskrit, and when you're trying to set some, you have like really interesting skills, but then you really need to understand how do I best fit them. There may be people who early on will be super excited and they might help you to say, okay, actually apply through classics and then we'll use their institutional knowledge to a little bit guide you. But really, that's only relevant to few people, unless when it's of course, you don't know, everybody thinks they're special,
Mhm.
unless it's like a unique situation. If you're just contacting saying, "Hey, I do cool stuff. I love your work." Okay, that's it's nice, but it doesn't really do anything to promote your application.
I think we do actually have a pretty good nose for those things. And we can talk about this another time too, about office hours and when the student is coming with sincere questions and when they are ingratiating themselves. I think that it's a very obvious thing for the professor and students may
Right,
really know how obvious coming across. A
right.
couple other questions from students. One was a very basic one. How many PhD programs should I apply to? I applied to 3 Canadian master's programs because there was no direct entry PhD.
Mm,
And I applied to 4 or 5 US PhD programs. And I think that was just about as much as I could handle while I was actually taking classes at the same time and finishing up my senior year. Would that number resonate with you, or do you think more or less is wise?
I actually have less to say about that,
Sure.
partly because so at some point, I applied to graduate school, and I can tell you about my strategy. But then nowadays, I only have the point of view from one institution. I guess my initial reaction to say again, don't try to game the system. So I think it's not a faceless bureaucratic thing. At the end of the day, you're asking people who are friendly and who are spending quite a bit of time in
Mhm,
evaluating your materials and then truly trying to help you out. I would say keep it on a human scale, therefore. The usual strategy is to apply to several top schools in your field, let's say two, three, four, where they're truly within the top 10 in your field, to apply to several solid schools who are not in the top 10. There's not a huge difference between top 10 and top 20, top 30. Excellent people are everywhere, and you could do the same kind of work in as long remember the happy, healthy, productive. You
mhm,
like the weather, you like the people, the institution is great, there's opportunities to change a little bit, you're not pigeonholed to one person. So there's probably two, three, four schools like that that are not safety schools, but it's where you could envision yourself truly and where you'll be happy to do the work and that work is plausible. And so that leaves us two, three, four here, two, three, four there. That leaves us under a dozen or so applications. I think it's probably normal. And also remember, your applications should be tailored. This is not like law school. And you're not going to be able to apply for more than like a dozen or so schools. So keep it human, keep it in the human scale in terms of the number.
mhm. Yeah, completely co-signed. I think there's nothing more embarrassing than to realize you've put somebody's wrong name into an application. And of course, people will notice. Yeah. So I think just to keep it manageable for yourself, where you can really do a good job of tailoring your work. And I like your recommendation to vary the kinds of schools or even the locations of schools in recognition that there are good faculty everywhere. Many things have to be in play for you to have a good experience, and prestige is only one of several factors.
Certainly. A good exercise that should make you happy. If you look at our faculty page or any faculty page, but look at like a large department, you'll see 20, 30 faculty members. Yes, like many of them will come from elite institutions, but you'll see plenty of people, probably in our department, at least half, who come, especially the United States has a deep roster of excellence. University of Michigan, my alma mater, Indiana, Iowa, Northeastern, Northwest, Texas A&M. The point is there's so many schools where they're research one schools. They're top-notch research-oriented schools, and many of our faculty come from those institutions. Point is, ending up at a place like this is great, and it could be actually better than being in some small, tiny department in the middle of the woods somewhere. I'm not gonna name any names, but being in a large place with a larger support network in a place where you have things to do, not just academically, but culturally and whether it's nature. Again, if you are joining a career, you're moving to a new city often, and at the end of the day, you're not going to skate by the reputation of the school. You're going to succeed or fail by the virtue of your work. And the question is, where can you be happy, healthy, productive to do the best work possible? I think that's pretty good. Let's end on this note and
Mhm.
let's say leave your questions down
Yes.
for the video. We will try, we're still experimenting with this format, so we will try to have opportunities for live questions. I think people may have very specific questions, and if there is enough interest, we may invite colleagues from computer science or from biology or from science who maybe can address this question more specifically, speaking about how it works in different fields. Let's try
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again probably next week.
Okay. Pleasure as
Bye,
ever.
Erin.